everybody. Please continue to eat. I'm Tom Phillips, I work for the U.S. Jindal. I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. The poor guy hasn't had a chance to eat because he's so gracious. He's been given pictures and autographs. But I'll tell you a little bit about Louisiana before I introduce the next speaker. I actually lived in Louisiana back when I was a kid down in New Orleans. And so I've followed Louisiana politics over the years. And I've also followed Louisiana's progress since they had a conservative revolution go their way down in Louisiana. And they have done incredible work. So much so that when we came into power in 2011, Louisiana was one of those states that I told my members, let's see what they're doing well, let's match them and try and beat them, because they truly are the competition. I mean, they truly are setting a standard, and when we all compete to set those standards for lower taxes and fewer regulations, everyone benefits. Well, let me tell you about the governor. The governor, I believe, is really an example of someone who has realized the American dream. He was born in 1971 to immigrant parents. He's lived in Baton Rouge, he's lived in Louisiana all of his life. Like me, he spent time as a management consultant. Applied that experience, I think, to run very successful campaigns, to be a successful member of Congress, but then to come back and lead the state in what I believe to be is some of the most progress of any state in the nation. Governor Jindal deserves a lot of credit for that. I'm sure it's kind of like North Carolina, where from time to time the legislature and the governor disagrees. I'm sure it's all kumbaya down there. But you know, it takes that chemistry and that friction to make it work. But I think the thing that I admire most about Governor Jindal is how much he cares about our party and how much he cares about us being honest with each other, treating us like adults, coming together, getting the 20% that we disagree with from time to time off the table, get that 80% in front. Because making it work in Louisiana, that's how we'll make it work in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce the 55th governor from the state of Louisiana, Governor Bobby Jindal. Bobby Jindal. Your speaker has done an amazing job. He has taken over the state legislature. Now we need to help him to take over the United States Senate. Let's give a round of applause. There are so many reasons we should be excited and work hard for his election this fall. Certainly, he's exemplified principled conservative leadership here at the state level. Certainly, his opponent, Kay Hagan, I heard recently, she is now, as I've said, for the 24th time. Under Obamacare, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. You know, I've got a message for, I've got 3 young kids, and I tell them this all the time. Just because you say it over and over doesn't make it true. The first 24 times hasn't worked, the next 24 times hasn't worked. There are so many reasons to send him to the United States Senate. He's done such a great job here, he'll do such a great job there. But instead of me spending all my time with you just talking about why it's so important, I'll summarize with just one simple reason. If he doesn't do anything else, he'll do a lot more. Electing him to the United States Senate will mean that we can retire Harry Reid as the majority For no other reason, we've got to work hard to tell our neighbors, our friends, everybody we work with why this election is so important. It is an honor to be here with him and his beautiful wife. It's also an honor here to be with your chairman. Chairman Pope's done a phenomenal job working to take a purple state and make it a solidly red state. I'm not only grateful for your chairman's hard work, but I've met so many volunteers, activists, and others from across this great state that are working hard every day to help us win elections, convert voter by voter to our cause, to show people conservative principles work. Let's give a round of applause, not only to your chairman, but every one of you. The tremendous work you're doing.
Now, Dr. Bennett did such a great job. For years, he's been talking about the importance of moral virtues, the importance of preserving our great culture in these United States of America. That is so important. That is so important. Dr. Bennett did a phenomenal job here this morning. Let's give him a round of applause. I've only got one more, I promise. I know it sounds like a Grammy speech. I'm just thanking everybody else. I'll be thanking my agent and the last but not least, very importantly, I want to thank your governor. Patrick Corey has done a phenomenal job cutting tax and cutting regulations. Yeah, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to speak to you about this afternoon. And I realized, I finally thought the most important thing I can talk about is what I think is the most dangerous legacy out of the Obama administration. Now, there's a lot that I don't like about the Obama administration. I could have gotten up and talked to you today about $17 trillion of debt. Could have talked to you today about EPA regulations that will strangle our economy. Could have talked to you today about a diminishing foreign presence and a diminishing foreign policy on the world stage. I could talk to you today about the decay of our culture day by day. I could talk to you today about a new normal where 2% economic growth is called to recovery. I could talk to you today about the creation of a new entitlement program when we can't afford the programs we've got. I could talk about the new debt, the new regulations, the expansion of government power. And all of those things are awful components of this president's legacy. And all of those things are things we're going to have to fight hard to repeal and replace. But the thing that worries me the most about this president's administration and his legacy and the impact on our country is this president's attempts through rhetoric, through policy, to redefine the definition of the American dream. Now, what do I mean by that? If you listen to this president long enough, you pay attention to his policies, you hear a very disturbing message. What you hear him doing is demonizing those who have been successful. You hear him trying to divide us by age, by gender, by geography, by income. You hear him trying to tell us that the American dream is about equality of outcomes as opposed to equality of opportunity. If you listen to this president carefully, you pay attention to his policies, you realize in his worldview, the American dream really involves managing the slow decline of a once great economy, a once great country. His view of the American dream involves a bigger, more intrusive federal government, so we look more and more like Europe every day. His view of the American dream is trusting our government, not our people, to make the most important and fundamental decisions in our lives. I don't know about you, but that is not the American dream that my parents taught me about. The American dream I grew up learning about is an America where we are a forever young country, where our best days are ahead of us, not behind us. An America where this century belongs to us, not China and America, where the circumstances of our birth don't determine our outcomes as an adult. An America where you don't have to be born in the right zip code, to the right parents, to the right gender, to the right class, the right race, to do well as an adult in this amazing country. American dream I learned about is one where every generation leaves more opportunities for our children than we inherited from our parents. And I want to talk about what we can do to fight to preserve that version of the American dream for our children. Before I do that, I want to share with you why this fight is so important to me personally. You see, my parents, they have lived the American dream. My dad's one of 9 kids. One of 9, he was the only one, the first and the only one to get past the 5th grade. Indeed, he grew up in a family, grew up in a house without running water, without electricity. I know because we have heard these stories every single day of our lives. You try to get an allowance out of a dad like that. He'd say, son, how much do you reckon you should be paying me for room and board? Because I'm feeding you every day. But I bet you everybody here has got a story like that. Maybe it was you, maybe it was your parents, maybe your grandparents who was the first in your family. Here's what's amazing about my dad's story. So he finally gets his education. And then nearly 50 years ago, my dad and my dad takes his pregnant wife, and they move halfway across the world. They come to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, so that my mom could attend LSU. But here's what's amazing about this story. This was before the days of the internet. This was at a time when it was very expensive, very hard to get on a plane. This was at a time where long-distance phone calls were extremely expensive. My parents had never visited America. My parents had never been to Louisiana. My parents had never met anybody who had actually been to Louisiana. So it's not like anybody could come back and tell them, oh, it's a great state. They've got great food, the temperature's like this, the people, they knew nobody that had even been in the state. But here's what's amazing. My dad had this unshakable faith, this absolute pure conviction. He just knew in his bones, if I can get there, and if I'm willing to work hard, I can create more opportunities for my unborn child, for my future grandchildren. He believed in the American dream from half a world away. So they get to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They move into married student housing. They've got a couple of dollars in their pockets. My mom starts going to school at LSU. My dad's looking for a job. He doesn't know a soul, doesn't know anybody. What do you do? He starts flipping through the yellow pages, the phone book. He starts calling company after company after company, trying to convince somebody to hire him sight unseen. I don't know how many days, how many hours, how many weeks this last. I don't know how many times people slammed the phone down on him, but he kept calling and calling and calling. I need to tell you, my dad, he's got an accent. Now, I don't mean like you and me. We talk normally. I don't get when people say we don't have an accent. They're the ones who talk for me. My dad, he's got an accent. He's got a thick accent. And I guess he finally wore some poor guy down because finally, after all these calls, there was a guy from a railroad company that offered him a job on Monday morning. Sight unseen said, you can start this Monday. What I love about the next part of this story is my dad's just unbridled energy and enthusiasm. You have to know my dad to understand the next part. So he tells his new boss, whom he's not even met yet. That's great. He said, now look, I don't have a car, I don't have a driver's license. So he tells his new boss, you're going to have to pick me up on the way to work. The guy was so impressed by his desire to work, he did exactly that. 6 months later, I was born. I was born at Women's Hospital in Baton Rouge. Same hospital, by the way, where our first two children were born. But I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. There was no Obamacare back then, but what that meant was my parents' insurance wouldn't cover me, wouldn't cover my birth. But what I love about the next part of this story, there was no government program, no paperwork. My dad just shook hands with the doctor. He made a promise he would pay as much as he could every month until he paid that bill in full. I want you to think about that. Two guys in a hospital just shaking hands. That's the way you did things back then. I had two kids at that same hospital. My wife gave birth twice at that same hospital. We had great insurance. It took us hours to fill out the paperwork. But it was a simpler time back then. I asked my dad about that. I said, how would that work today? How do you pay for a baby on an installment plan? I mean, if you skip a payment, what does the hospital do? Can they take the baby back? Can they repossess it? He said, look, if they would have taken you back, we would have skipped the payment just to send you. He said, don't worry, you're paid for in full. Don't worry, nobody's coming to get you. You know, the reason I tell you that, Mark Twain said something that I've found to be true in my life. He said, the older you get, the smarter your parents become. I don't know about you, when I was a little boy, I'd say foolish things to my parents. Now that I've got 3 young kids at home, I find myself saying the same things my dad said to me that I used to hate to hear as a child. And I'm beginning to appreciate why my dad was so tough on me. You know, I'll say things to my kids like, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? I never understood that as a child, but I say it all the time. I'm sounding more and more like my dad. I told my youngest the other day. I said, now, you don't live in a democracy. As long as you live under my roof, you're going to live under my rules. One of the things my dad would teach my brother and me growing up, something I didn't appreciate until I was a little bit older. He'd tell us almost every day, look, sons, I'm not leaving you a famous last name. I'm not leaving you an inheritance. But I'm going to make sure you get a great education. Because if you work hard, he said, there's no limit what you can do in this country. He would tell us, you should get down on your knees every day and give thanks to God Almighty that you are blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world. To be honest didn't understand the importance of it. Everybody I knew was an American, so what did it mean to be grateful to be an American? But now that I have my own children, I'm beginning to understand what my dad was trying to teach me, and I try to teach that to them as well. And that's why I think it is so important for all of us to fight so hard to preserve the American dream. We must not become the first generation that mortgages our children's future and leaves fewer opportunities. Part of fighting for that American dream, if we really believe in an opportunity society, if we really believe in an aspirational society, we've got to fight to make sure that every child does have the same chance to get a great education. What do I mean by that? You know, there are so many things I could talk about today. In Louisiana, we've done a lot of things I'm proud of. We've cut our state budget 26%. We enacted the largest income tax cut in our state's history. Cut 28,000 state government jobs, highest credit ratings in decades, strongest private sector economy in a lifetime, lowest unemployment rate in the South. So many things we could have talked about. And by the way, the strongest pro-life bills and the strongest pro-life protections in the entire country year after year in the state of Louisiana. Of all the things we've done, the thing I want to talk about today is what we have done to fight to give our children a chance to get a great education. Because you see, I think this is so critical. If we're going to oppose the president and say redistribution is not the American dream, or rather growing the economy and more opportunity, that's the American dream. It starts with making sure that our children get a great education. We all say we're for equal opportunity. The honest truth is, there are millions of children in America trapped in failing schools. And it's really not fair to them to look them in the face and say that you can pursue your dream. You could be the first in your family to graduate from high school, to become a businessman, an entrepreneur, an engineer, a doctor, an accountant, a farmer, or whatever it is you dream of doing. How many moms and dads across America have told their children anybody can grow up to become the next president of the United States? Unfortunately, in 2012, we found out just how true that statement was. Going back to our kids, it's not fair to tell them if they're trapped in failing schools, they've got the same chance at the American dream. What I worry about is we don't fight for every child. Look, there are practical reasons to care about this. If you want to grow the economy, lower the incarceration rates, improve healthcare outcomes, reduce the cost of welfare, it starts with education. But I would also argue there's a moral imperative. If we're going to win this fight for what it means to live the American dream, we have to fight for opportunity for every American. Now, we've done a lot of things in Louisiana. I'll tell you, the left will tell you, just throw more money at it. We have doubled what we have spent per student after inflation since the 70s. Our scores are flat. We spend the second largest portion of our economy on education. In the developed world, our scores are still flat. If you were in your 50s when you went to school, we ranked number 1 in the world in education. If you're in your 20s, we ranked number 16. Can you imagine going to the Olympics and saying we're number 16? It's not who we are as an American people. It's not what we've got. We can't accept that if we want to be a superpower, if we want to maintain our quality of life. We've done several things in Louisiana. I'll just mention 2 quickly. Number 1, we have fought hard to put a great teacher in every classroom. Now, why is that so important? Study after study shows if your child has a great teacher, they'll earn thousands of dollars, likely to go to college, less likely to become pregnant as a teenager. But you don't need a study to know that. Every one of us remembers that teacher that was harder on us. Took a special interest in us is the reason we are where we are today. And so we have fought hard. We've increased teacher pay. We've changed the way we evaluate teachers. We basically said we've got to have a great teacher in every classroom. Here's the second thing we've done. And this is maybe the most important. We said we want to make sure, instead of forcing the child to follow the dollar, we want to make the dollar follow the child so that parents can choose the best way for their children to be educated. Now, what does that mean? It means that every child learns differently. Some children do great in public schools. Some children do great in online programs, charter schools, private schools, Christian schools, parochial schools, independent programs, dual enrollment programs. Every child, homeschooling, every child learns differently. And we've got to trust parents to be the first and best educators of their children. We've done 3 or 4 things. For example, we've got course choice where kids can start in public school in the day and then do private courses throughout the day. We'll pay for it. We've done things like charter schools. 90% of our kids in New Orleans are now in charter schools. The largest percentage of any city in the country. In 5 years. In 5 years, we've doubled the percentage of kids doing reading and math on grade level. Before Katrina, over 60% of those kids were in failing schools. Now it's less than 6%. Before Katrina, the percent graduating was a little over half. Now it's over 3/4. We've got more work to do, but what this shows is the left is wrong when they tell us just to wait. When they tell us just to spend more money and wait for incremental progress, the left is wrong. Our children only grow up once. They only have one chance to get a great education. It's immoral to tell that child to wait for 10, 20, 30, 40 years while nothing really changes. We've done more than charter schools. We've done a dollar-for-dollar tax rebate for those who donate to organizations to help kids attend private schools. And here's the one that's gotten the most attention, the most controversy. We've created a statewide scholarship program. So now parents can truly decide where their children should go to school, whether it's a local public school, whether it's a private school, parochial school, or whatever. Because the reality is a lot of parents, they'll move to neighborhoods with great schools. Other parents, they'll save their money and send their kids to great private schools. But a lot of parents that don't have that choice, their kids are trapped in failing schools. And so what we've said is let the parents decide the best schools for their children. This program has grown by double digits every year. We've got now thousands of kids participating. We've saved our taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. 93% of the parents are satisfied with the program, and academic scores are getting better year after year after year in this program. So who can be opposed to a program that gives parents choice, puts competition to education, and empowers families? Well, the teacher unions first. Teacher unions in Louisiana said that parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their kids. Parents don't have a clue. I met with a group of moms the next day. They said, Governor, we make choices for our kids every day. And by the way, we know our kids better than the bureaucrats in Baton Rouge or Washington, D.C. Well, make no mistake about this. This is exactly the fight that's going on in our country. The left doesn't think we're smart enough. The president, his allies, they don't think we're smart enough to be trusted to decide what size Slurpee or soda we can drink. They don't think we're smart enough to pick our own health insurance problem. They don't think we're smart enough to pick the right school for our child. They don't think we're smart enough to exercise our Second Amendment rights or our First Amendment rights. This is the best summary of the debate that's going on right now in our country. I want you to remember what the union official said. Parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their kids. It got so bad, some superintendents told their employees, if you want to go protest the governor's policies, we'll give you a paid day off. Otherwise, you got to report to school. It got so bad, there were so many of these protesters, I began to tell my kids, that's just a parade for daddy. That's what we got daddy. My little girl was 9 years old at the time. She was having trouble falling asleep during one of these debates. And she said, well, no, I mean, not during the debate, but while this debate was going on, and one night she was having trouble going to sleep, and she asked me a pretty honest question. She goes, Daddy, some of those folks, they're mad at you, aren't they? I said, well, yeah, they are, sweetheart. And she said, well, is my teacher mad at you? I thought, my poor girl, she's probably worried she's going to get in trouble in school because of her daddy's going to get a bad grade. And so I reassured her. I said, no, sweetheart. Your teacher actually supports daddy's reform. She loves what we're doing. She's in support of all this. I misjudged my little girl. She said, well, Daddy, that's not fair. She said, if my teacher was mad at you, I wouldn't have to go to school tomorrow like those other kids. I thought, this is great. My little girl's going to go protest on my policy so she don't have to go to school. I had to explain to her why she wasn't allowed to do that. Teacher unions took us to court. They try to recall me, they try to recall our speaker, and yet we're still standing after all those fights. And so we thought when we were finally in the clear, then we learned that the Department of Justice and Eric Holder was going to take us to federal court to stand in the way of parents getting a better education for their children. Now, I invited the president, and I invited Eric Holder time and time again to not come meet with me and hear my side of the case, but go meet with the moms of these kids. Because I can share with you all kinds of numbers and statistics. What is most impressive to me is the mom saying to me, Governor, this is the first time my daughter's brought homework from school. This is the first time my child's worn a uniform to school. First time my child's going to school where it's safe. It's the first time my child is thinking of what they're going to do after high school. It is the first time that my child is going to a school where there's supplies in the bathroom and in the classroom. One mom told me her story. She had been a teenage mom. She had been on welfare. Her mom had her when she was a teenager. She'd been on welfare. And now this mom was working 3 jobs to keep her daughter in a better school and was benefiting from this program, and simply said, I want my daughter to have a brighter future and not to repeat the mistakes I made or my mom made when we were her age. To me, that's the American dream. Every mom wants her son, wants her daughter to do better. Whoever you are, we simply want more opportunities. So when Eric Holder took us to court, I went to D.C. and I said, this is cynical, immoral, and hypocritical. I'm not sure I'll be invited back to the White House, by the way. I said it is cynical. 50 years, almost 50 years to the day after Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, to use the laws designed to protect our kids, and disadvantaged kids in particular, to keep them trapped in failing schools. Over 90% of these kids are minorities. Secondly, I said it was hypocritical because you know that Eric Holder and President Obama wouldn't send their children to these failing schools. And I'm glad they have the chance to send their kids to better schools. I simply want the same chance for the parents of North Carolina and Louisiana and every state in this great country. I also think it's immoral because our kids only have one chance to grow up. It got so absurd at one point the Department of Justice went to the federal court and asked the judge to say after Louisiana grants a scholarship, don't let them tell the parents for 45 days. So that the Department of Justice could examine the records to decide whether the child was of the correct race. I thought in America it wasn't supposed to matter what color or gender or what our wealth was. I thought in America it was all about making sure that every child gets a great education. I went back to Baton Rouge and I made this statement. I said, we will take them to the United States Supreme Court if that's what it takes to defend the children of Louisiana. I'm proud to report, even though it was a federal judge appointed by a Democratic president, we beat the Department of Justice. But this leads to a natural question. How do you get to the point where our own federal government is trying to keep kids trapped in failing schools? You know, it actually reminds me of the one time I've actually agreed with David Axelrod. He was trying to defend the president from some scandal. I don't remember, it may have been the IRS or the AP or Benghazi or Fast. There's so many, it's hard to keep track. He was trying to defend the president, and this was his defense. He said the president couldn't possibly be responsible. The president couldn't possibly have known what was going on because the federal government is so vast, so expansive. Well, for the first time, David Axelrod is exactly right. Maybe not in the way he thought, but he is right. The problem is the government is so vast and so expansive. Remember when Bill was wrong about something so important in our modern political history? You know, if I could have gone back in time, before President Obama took office, if I was standing in front of you, and if I could have asked you this, if I could have asked you, do you really believe that the next president of the United States is going to run our national debt up to $17 trillion? Would you have believed me? No. If I would have gone back in time and said, will you really believe the next president of the United States is going to create a new expensive entitlement program when we can't afford the ones we've got and we'll put government bureaucrats between us and our doctors? Would you have believed me? No. If I would have gone back in time and said, would you believe the next president of the United States is going to fight to keep guns away from law-abiding Americans even as they send guns to drug cartels in Mexico and are Fast and Furious? Would you have believed me? No. If I could have gone back in time and said, would you believe that our ambassador is going to be killed in Libya and that the administration is going to blame it on a YouTube video? Would you have believed me? If I would have gone back in time and said that our Secretary of State at the time, Secretary Clinton, would then go to Congress and get so frustrated having explained these debts that she would actually say, what difference does it make? Would you have believed me? If I would have gone back in time and said, would you believe the next president of the United States is going to use the IRS, the next administration is going to use the IRS to go after conservative groups for their political beliefs? Would you have believed me? It is amazing the things we have seen happen in our country. And here's the greatest assault of all on our liberty. It's the unprecedented attack on our religious liberty that is going on by our own federal government. You know, the most obvious example right now is the Hobby Lobby case. The Green family has now got a case up in front of the United States Supreme Court. The Obama administration is threatening them with $1.3 million a day in fines. $1.3 million a day in fines simply because they refuse to pay for abortifacients for their employees. But this is just one of many examples. You look at what's happening in our society. You know, I knew the president wasn't a fan of the Second Amendment to the Constitution, but apparently he's not a fan of the First Amendment to the Constitution either. His view of religious liberty is that it starts and ends in our church pews on Sundays, and that's it. You know, I know that we have constantly said that he's a smart man, and I know that he's supposed to be a constitutional scholar, and he graduated from Harvard Law. I'm not in favor of lawsuits. We just signed some tort reform legislation yesterday in Louisiana, but I'm actually in favor of one particular lawsuit. I would advise the President of the United States. I think he should sue Harvard Law School to get his tuition back. I've got a message for President Obama that I wish he had learned with all those years of education. The United States of America did not create religious liberty. Religious liberty created the United States of America. You may have noticed that when the Duck Dynasty failed, when Phil Robertson got into some trouble, one of his first and loudest defenders was the governor of the state of Louisiana. Now, you may have thought I did that simply because they're from the state of Louisiana. You may have thought I did that because my little boys are fans of the show. You may have thought I did that because it's actually a show I'm glad they can watch. Unlike so much stuff on TV, you don't have to worry about the language and the images that come on. You may have thought I did that because they're actually personal family friends of ours. But no, the reason I thought it was so important to stand up for Phil and the Robertsons and the Duck Dynasty family was this. I'm simply tired of the left. I'm tired of these hypocrites. They tell us that they're for tolerance. They tell us they're for diversity. And here's the honest truth. They are for tolerance and diversity as long as you don't disagree with them. It is no coincidence, by the way, that the group that seems to be getting attacked more and more and more in our society happens to be evangelical Christians. You may remember this president, when he was campaigning for his first term, was secretly taped, saying that folks in America were clinging to their guns and religion. Yeah, I know that was supposed to be an insult, but in the state of Louisiana, we've got plenty of both guns and religion, and we're proud of it in our state. The president needs to understand there is no freedom of speech, there is no freedom of association without religious liberty. An assault on this right is an assault on our other rights as well. That's why I thought it was so ironic. A few months ago, the president was speaking at the National Prayer Breakfast. And he spoke eloquently on the assault on religious liberty and on Christians taking place overseas. Yet again, there was a Grand Canyon-sized difference between what he says and what he does. How ironic, he spoke so well about what was happening overseas while his own administration goes after people of faith right here at home. Now, I do want to be careful. We have a silent war on religious liberty in America. That is very different from the very, very physical violence going on against Christians and believers overseas in many countries. That's a different type of war. That's a shooting war on religious liberty. But nonetheless, going back to the president's remarks, you know, it was wonderful to hear him speak so eloquently. I can summarize, if you hadn't heard the speech, I can summarize it for you. He basically said this. If you like your religious liberty, you can keep your religious liberty. You know, as I close, I want to just comment briefly on the latest insanity of this last week. The final straw, for me at least, from this administration. I know many of you have been following the news and you've seen that apparently our administration has adopted a new foreign policy. We're apparently now engaged in a catch and release program when it comes to hunting down terrorists. I've got 3 questions for you, and I really do want to hear your answer. I want to make sure we're on the same page on this. Do you think that it makes sense for the President of the United States to negotiate with terrorists? No. Do you think that the President of the United States should feel free to break the law, to ignore the law whenever he wants? No. Do you think it makes sense for the President of the United States to release 5 terrorists who've waged war not only on American citizens but on our way of life and our very values? Do you think it makes sense for the President to release these kinds of terrorists? No. You know, I've long thought about this next question. And this is a tough one. This is a tough one. I don't know the perfect answer. But I've long wondered, are we witnessing the most modern, ideologically extremely liberal administration in the history of our country? Yes. Or are we witnessing the most incompetent administration? I've thought long and hard about this question. Here's the best answer I've come up with. To quote Secretary Clinton, what difference does it make? I'll close with this. I sense there is a rebellion brewing in these United States of America. I sense there are good, decent, hard-working, God-fearing people in places like North Carolina and Louisiana and states all over America saying enough is enough. Saying that we don't want to just make incremental change in D.C. We want a hostile takeover. We want to restore the American dream for our children and grandchildren so they can enjoy the bounty we inherited from our parents, the blessings of living in the greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you for fighting the good fight. God bless you. Thank you very much for having me.